Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. I'm joined with Matthew Dix, and I've reached out to Matthew because I read one of his books. I'll be honest, I did not read it. I listened to it because that's the way I consume a lot of my information. And his book, Storyworthy, really resonated with me. And then when I found out that he's also a teacher, I'm like, oh, we got to get him on the show. So Matthew, thanks for joining us on your winter break here.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So Matthew is, why don't you give you're going to tell it way better than I can. Give me what your passion is.
Well, it sort of depends on the day. You know, I'm a writer, so I'm a novelist and a nonfiction writer. So there are days when that is absolutely my passion, or at least portions of my day when that is my passion. I stand on stages around the country and tell stories and do stand-up comedy. So there's moments when that is my passion. But, you know, I guess ultimately I'm a teacher more than anything. I work with a lot of corporations and public schools and universities and inspirational speakers, helping them to become better speakers. And then I spend my days with 10-year-olds teaching them fifth grade curriculum all at the same time. So whatever I'm doing, I like to say I'm working in sentences. But I guess my goal is to bring those sentences to people to sort of help change and improve their lives if I can in some way. And that tends to be most of the time with 10-year-old kids.
Perfect. So we're going to hit a few different aspects of that, but I'm going to start in kind of the highest level when we talk about why we do this show. It's all about how do we improve education? And we have some really distinct groups of listeners to this. One with architects that are building new schools through our Association for Learning Environments affiliation. We also have school leaders, school superintendents that are with Education Leaders Organization. And then we also have kind of like the change maker group, the ones that are just like, how do we do this better? All of them really come together in a nonprofit that we're affiliated with called Second Class Foundation. And the sole purpose of that is to improve education through the use of media and storytelling. So leading into that, you're distinct, I would say, when I listened to your book, it was really about the craft, like really getting into the craft of storytelling. And, you know, you've had tons of experience from being on The Moth and winning. How many wins you got now on them?
Like 59, I think, right now.
So anyone who has not listened to The Moth, hopefully they have. But if they haven't, go listen to those. But it's so well crafted. I was hoping you can just give a little bit of overview of like what makes a story? Like what are those components that make a story compelling?
Sure. I guess the first question you asked was the best one, which is what is a story? Because we tend not to know what that is. Most people categorize stories as something happened to me, and now I'm going to tell you the thing that happened, and the result will be a story. And I tell people that is reporting on your life. That is an accounting of events that took place, but don't necessarily amount to a story. And it turns out no one really wants you to account for your time in any way. Those tend to be terrible moments in our lives when people are sharing things that are ultimately meaningless.
Like vacations where people just sequentially just want to go through day by day of what their vacation was like.
But that's basically how people sort of tell most stories, which is I'm just going to sequentially tell you what happened. And the worst version of it, probably it's a first grader who said, you know, you say, how was your day yesterday? And they start always in the morning because every story for a first grader begins with the moment they open their eyes, because every story is what happened during the course of a day. So those are not really stories. Those really are reporting on our lives. And if you have a loved one, like a spouse, they are willing to put up with the reporting of your life, but most people are not. So a story ultimately is about change over time. It is really a story about a time in your life when you were one thing, and then some stuff happened, and now you're a different thing. Or you used to think one thing, and then some stuff happened, and now you think differently. Or if I'm working with a corporation, it might be, we used to not have a product, and then some stuff happened, and now we have a product that we're ready to offer the world. Whatever it is, it has to be change in some way, enormous or tiny over time. That's all stories. That's every movie you watch. That is every book you read. That is every television show you watch. Ultimately, we have a character or protagonist of some sort, and that protagonist is going to undergo some kind of change or seek to undergo change that ultimately fails. But even through the seeking of change, we can achieve a story, but we need change over time.
So when you're looking at things, as somebody who is communicating with other people, because I mean, I have my stories. I'll just give you a little bit of my background of how I utilize my stories. My first job out of college, I was driving the Eckridge Funhouse around the country. And for people who don't know the Eckridge Funhouse, this is like the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile's competitor. So it was this big yellow truck, had a big smiley face, had a hot dog bumper, had a Pop-A-Shot that came out of the back of it, and a grill that pulled out of the side. And they, for some reason, let my best friend, my college roommate, and myself drive this around the country for 6 months, like a week after we graduated from college.
Yeah.
Not sure why they did that, but what I learned in that was they gave us media training. One of the first things that they did, and they talked about our sparklers. That was a term that they said, because when you're doing this, we had a lot of like local media where, depending on what city we were in, we would go and like the local TV show or radio or something like that, and we had to work in these 3 to 5 sparklers into every conversation that we had. So it would be things like, we're here raising money for the local food bank during the summer grilling season. We're here to reintroduce a great taste of Eckridge smoked grillers to our loyal fan base. Like all these different ones that we had to work into any conversation. And I've used that. I'm like, everyone's got to have like those 3 to 5 kind of go-to stories. And I've really incorporated throughout my career, and trying to get my team and the people that I work with to understand, like, what are those 3 to 5 stories that you have. So I tell you that because everyone should have them. But I mean, what's your sense when you're doing workshops, when you're doing things? Do you talk like in similar ways to that, or do you find that people have like kind of their go-to stories?
They don't have go-to stories, and they need them. You know, I actually train sort of corporate leaders to have 3 to 5 stories in their back pocket for moments when they're speaking on stage and they've realized they've lost the audience, that no one cares what they say anymore. And I always have those too. If I'm going and speaking for 90 minutes at Yale, I have 5 anecdotes that I know how to take out and weave into the talk that will bring the audience right back to me. So I think that's really important. I think ultimately the problem is most adults, for some reason, assume that because people are sitting in front of them in a classroom or an auditorium, or if you're an educational leader in a faculty meeting or a superintendent at a board meeting, adults weirdly have this assumption that because other people are sitting in front of them, the people sitting in front of them want to hear anything they have to say. And because of that, no one ever seeks to be entertaining, which should be the number one thing you do, whether you're teaching a lesson to students, leading a faculty meeting, leading a board meeting, any one of these things, you must be entertaining first. Otherwise, no one wants to hear anything you have to say, which is why professional development tends to be horrendous almost all of the time. Because no one ever begins their professional development with, how am I going to grab everyone's attention? And then how am I going to hold on to their attention? Because they just assume, well, they're grown-ups and they're here, so they must want to hear what I have to say, when that is never the case. And as soon as we dispel ourselves of that notion, as a storyteller, I can tell you every single time I take the stage, I aggressively assume that no one wants me there, that no one wants to hear anything I have to say, and therefore I have to relentlessly craft a story that will cause people to want to wonder about the next thing I'm going to say. And when I plan a lesson for students, the first and primary thing I ask myself is, how am I going to hook my students into this lesson? Because I do not assume anyone wants to learn long division or what the pre-contact North American continent looked like during the indigenous times. These are not things that students want to hear. Now, I think there is a subset of kids who definitely want to hear those things. There are those active learners, those curious kids. But if we're teaching to them, we're making a mistake because we already have them. I am always thinking about in my classroom, who wants to learn the least today? And every single lesson is targeted at the kid who wants to learn the least. And so I walk into every single situation knowing I have to entertain. And I think most adults never have that cross their mind at all in any way whatsoever.
And I would agree with that. And I've seen some of your posts too, where you talk about, I mean, for our audience, I mean, whether you're in a board meeting, whether you're just in a staff meeting, or, you know, in really kind of like any of those situations for the business people, and you're usually just kind of going in there more with like a tactical purpose, but there's never that element to entertainment. And I would even layer that even further. There's a lot of educational conferences that are out there, that I know I go to, and a lot of people that listen to this are at these conferences. And that's usually one of the biggest complaints is we're talking about like creating better learning environments. And instead we end up having kind of the same thing, one person with a PowerPoint just giving information without really any intent of how do I make this entertaining.
Yeah, and all of that is forgettable. Ultimately forgettable. 99% of every professional development session I have been through in the last 25 years of my teaching career, 99.9% of them, I can't tell you what they were because they're all forgettable. People are almost like aggressively trying to be forgettable. My wife and I went to an education conference. She's a kindergarten teacher. I'm a fifth grade teacher. We saw a bunch of very competent speakers, but that's the problem is all they were competent. There was one guy, though, who took out his lunchbox from childhood, put it on a stool, and told a story about how his parents were immigrants and how they did everything they could to give him good shoes, good pants, and a good shirt. They worked 20 hours a week or 20 hours a day to do all of this so they could send their son to an American school and he could get an education. And now he's an assistant superintendent somewhere. And he keeps that lunchbox with him all the time because it reminds him of the sacrifices his parents made. And he makes him aware that there are parents making sacrifices in his school district too. I remember that talk and I'll remember it forever because he told a story that contained vulnerability and humor and authenticity. And it had stakes and surprise and suspense. It had everything you want from a story. And then someone else spoke right after him, another very competent speaker who delivered a lot of wonderful information. And 10 minutes after that conference ended, I said to my wife, "What did you think?" And she said, "Well, the lunchbox guy is tremendous." I said, "Yeah, right?" I said, "What about the next guy?" She goes, "He was great too." I said, "What did he say?" And she sat there in the car and she said, "God, I really can't remember anything he said, but he was good," right? Which is her way of saying he spoke in fluent sentences. He didn't trip on his words. He didn't say a lot of ums, but he actually said nothing in the end because it was forgettable and therefore meaningless. And almost all adult communication is forgettable and meaningless. Almost all of it, because people don't make an effort to be memorable in any way whatsoever, which is to say, be entertaining.
Yeah, that's a great example. It reminds me of just the whole adage in marketing and advertising. If you're doing a commercial, you can have like the best commercial ever, but if you don't actually know who it's for and you can't like remember, then it was a failure.
Yeah. Just ask yourself, like if you're an education person, you've been to a conference probably within the last year or professional development, ask yourself right now, how many things do you remember? How many moments from that conference did you actually take away and you can still remember it and you're utilizing it today? I would say for most people, they can remember nothing and they're utilizing nothing because it was not presented in any meaningful way.
I know you do a lot of workshops, a lot of training. Can I put you on the spot? Can I share like one of my stories and you like literally critique it and break it down if you're okay with it?
I'd be happy to. That's all I really do now. Nowadays I teach 10-year-olds and do this.
Perfect. All right. If this is horrible, we'll edit it out, but I'm really curious to hear. So one of the stories, like I own a school furniture company. So a lot of people ask, how'd you get into it? Or, there's 100 ways like how I have to explain like why I care about the work we do. And when it comes down to is I got into this industry by accident. I had zero interest in school furniture. I had zero interest ever walking into a school again. School was just for me something that I just wanted to get through. And when I found myself actually owning a school furniture company for the first few years, I looked around. I'm like, this is all identical. We are sitting here looking at schools, at classrooms that are exactly the same that what I went through. And it was the conversation of like the gauge of steel of the chairs, of what makes it different, or like the floor glide on the bottom of the chair. But a couple years into it, one of my friends who was a principal in the town that I was living in said, "Hey, I got a teacher that wants to try out something new, some new type of furniture. Can you help him?" And I'm like, "Sure, I can help him get that furniture." And we did 4 classrooms like that with this new type of furniture. And I came back into the school about a month later to just see how it was going. And I walked into the lobby of the school and you just felt a buzz coming from that wing of the school. It was immediate. You just knew. You're like, what is going on over there? And when I went and I saw what they were doing, the idea of where there was this flexibility in the classroom that kids can move around. There was no longer the front of the classroom, and they can use all four walls and start out in discussion mode and then go into group mode and then go into individual study or testing mode. You can use the hallways. You can actually move things out. That was the game changer for me, where I'm like, oh, what we are doing actually matters. And we stopped being a company that was selling furniture or selling stuff to becoming a mission-based company where we are out to improve learning environments. What do you think?
So I don't think it's very good.
Yeah,
I don't think it's very good.
All right, let's hear it.
Well, there's two ways we can go. Let's go with the way you told the story first, then I'll propose a different way.
All right.
The problem with the way you told the story, to me, I already knew where it was going and I knew what was going to happen, right? So anyone who says, well, I started in this business, I didn't think that furniture was really important. You've already told me that at the end, I'm going to discover that furniture is really important, right? And I already know when you walk into the school and you hear the buzz on the other side of the building, I already know what the buzz is, right? Everything is already laid out for me from the get-go. You know, Aaron Sorkin said the worst thing you can ever do to an audience is to tell them something they already know. And I sort of already knew every step, 2 steps before you actually made them. So I could see the story ahead of time. The goal is, you want an audience to experience the same sort of emotional reaction that you experienced. So you walked into that school and you were surprised, but you denied me the surprise by all of those words that you said beforehand that exposed the surprise to me and allowed me to see it before you got to see it. So you want to try to create sort of a beat by beat moment in order for me to experience this. So another way to format that story might be something like this. I walk into Lincoln Elementary School on a Tuesday afternoon, and there's something different about the other side of the building, and I can't quite figure out what it is at first. I'm walking down this hallway, and I'm walking by a classroom to the right, and I look inside, and it looks like the classroom that I grew up in. It's got rows of desks and chairs. There's a wonderful teacher teaching math, and the kids seem pretty engaged. And then I look to the left, and I see an art room, and it's the art room that I expect to see from my childhood. I loved art. I loved my art teacher. Everything seems great, but there is a buzz at the end of this hallway that does not make any sense to me. And so when I get to the end of the hallway and I turn, I see something that I really haven't seen before in a classroom. And I've been in a classroom for many, many years, for many, many times. And this is what I see. And you describe what it is. Now, I can't really describe it like you can because I don't understand it. But I'd take a moment, I'd describe it, and then I'd say, now I understand why I do what I do. I am a person who sells classroom furniture to schools and teachers. And until I walked down this hall on this day, I never really understood what I did. And now I understand why I go and worry about metal gauges and slide, all these things that I have thought were just sort of arbitrary decisions being made that had no influence in the lives of children. Now I'm staring at it having influence on children. So you allow us to take a step-by-step journey to a surprise, and then you explain the surprise to us, as opposed to what you did, which was sort of just spoil the surprise, which is what most people do.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thank you for being critical on that, because I that's what I would love to hear. When you're doing these workshops and you're setting them up for them, where do you start? Like, what's the first thing that you're trying to change? Because it does seem like it's a total mindset change.
Yeah. Well, we start with what is a story, because most people don't understand what that is. And then we really start with finding stories. Most people don't actively engage in their lives in a retrospective way. They don't think about their lives and capture stories over time. And so ultimately you don't have any stories to tell. The other way to tell your story, which is probably even a better way to do it, is to speak what I call through adjacency. So rather than even speaking about furniture, I might start my story depending on who you were. Let's say are you a golfer?
A little bit.
Okay, let's use golfing just because it's on my mind. My buddy just asked me to play today, even though it's drizzling. So I might start my story, if I knew you were a golfer, by saying something like this. I'm standing in the fairway. My ball is 2 inches into the short rough, which is really frustrating because if my drive had just not drifted to the right, I would be sitting smack dab in the middle of the fairway. But instead, I'm in 2 inches of a little bit of rough, and I have a decision to make. I can take out my 5-wood, and I can go for the green. and that's a totally reasonable shot for me to make. Or I could hit my 7-iron, which is very similar to a 5-wood, and I know I can put it possibly on the front of the green if I hit it really well. Or I can hit my 8-iron, and I can put it maybe 5 yards in front of the green, but I have a greater chance of putting it in front of the green. All of those decisions are in front of me. And it's crazy because the changes in these clubs is so infinitesimal, and yet the difference between the shot that I make will be extraordinary. It will be the difference between me getting a par and me getting a quadruple bogey, perhaps. Because sometimes these seemingly small decisions yield enormous results. Oddly, the same thing is true when it comes to something as seemingly benign as classroom furniture. A simple decision about the formulation of a chair can suddenly bring delight and attention and engagement into a kid. The simple design of a chair is basically the same as the decision between a 7-iron or an 8-iron or a 5-wood on that little bit of rough on the edge of the fairway. And that's the business I'm in. I'm in the business of taking what seem to be tiny decisions, and I'm exploiting them and making enormous changes in classrooms around the country. Now, that's a story I would use if I knew you were a golfer. If I know you're a parent, I'll pull out one of my parenting small decision stories, right? If I know that you're a theater nerd, I'll pull out a tiny theater decision that will make an enormous difference. So if you're a person who has a multitude of stories like me, all I do is I let you talk to me for a little while. I figure out what's your thing. I find a thing that matches your thing, and I get to tell you a story about golf. So we combine, we come together on something we love. You don't really know why I'm telling the golf story, but you're engaged in it because I know it has something of meaning to you, and I'll create some suspense, some drama, all of those things around it. And then I shift it to what I really want to be talking about, which in this case is classroom furniture. And that shift, that snap from one to the other is so powerful. And so that's another way you can talk about essentially classroom furniture by not talking about classroom furniture for a while and then popping over to it once we have connection and understanding and metaphor and meaning and all of those things. So that's, again, the idea that if you don't have a lot of stories to tell, if you're walking around with 3 stories in your pocket, you're dead. Yeah, I'm going to crush you every time. If I'm a salesperson and you're a salesperson, I have 9,000 stories, and that's not even an exaggeration. So if you got 3, you're dead. Like if you're walking around with a PowerPoint and you need your PowerPoint, you're dead. Because I've never needed a PowerPoint in my life. I'm just going to pull the power on the building that we're presenting in. You're going to sit there like trying to like hook your truck up to your PowerPoint so you can get battery and put something on a screen. Meanwhile, I don't need a PowerPoint because I'm a storyteller. I'm just going to tell you some good stories and you're going to buy my product instead. So the storyteller always wins, but you have to start by having lots and lots of stories to tell.
So let's talk about that, getting lots and lots of stories. When you're doing workshops and people are coming in, and how hard is it? Like what do you see the progression of somebody who's going through? Is there a moment where it clicks? Is there a moment where they're like, oh, I get it now? Or do you find that people is it a unique skill that someone like you is great at and is going to be kind of that elite golfer, and then there's just going to be a bunch of people just hacking up the golf course? No, it's not an elite skill at all. Thousands of people all over the world use some of the strategies that I use. Particularly one, homework for life is a phrase. If you've read my book, you know homework for life. Thousands and thousands of people use that all over the world. This is not an exaggeration. Just about every single day of my life, I receive an email or a Facebook communication or a tweet or something telling me how homework for life has changed someone's life just by simply doing it. So that acknowledgement that our lives are filled with stories, and that willingness to seek out those stories, that'll produce enormous results. Even if you don't want to tell a story, you should be doing this, because the tragedy of our lives is we live our lives as if the days don't matter. And so we just walk by days without taking any account, making any attempt to hold on to memories. All of those things sort of just drift away because we're always looking ahead and never seeking to grab the gold that we're throwing about in a single day. We never pick it up. We just walk past it like it's nothing. And so it's certainly not something that is, requires any talent of any kind. All right, I'm going to transition now, and afterward, I'm going to talk about. I want to see if we can do some workshops either with my company or with our association. We definitely are going to talk about that. But I want to get your perspective, because not everyone in our industry really is in a position to have the candid discussion with a teacher right now who has kind of seen progression. How long have you been teaching now?
25 years.
So 25 years. Can you give me kind of the state of education from your viewpoint of what's happened in those 25 years and where are we at now?
Well, it's been a bunch of interesting things that have happened over years. One of the weird things is there was a time when I was a younger teacher in the beginning of my career where I often had to convince kids to take risks and be daring and do things. I take my kids to the woods for 3 days every year, this camping trip. It's in cabins. It's barely camping. It's bathrooms and heat and everything. But back in the day, I used to have to convince kids that it was going to be okay to take you away from parents and no phones or anything for 3 days and we'll all be fine. And, I had to pick them up and carry them along. And over time, what's happened is I've had to now convince parents that things are going to be okay. I actually have students who always tell me, oh, I can't do that because I have one of those parents that don't let me do anything. So I have watched this odd shift from needing to build students' confidence, which is still a thing that I need to do, to building parents' confidence in their children or a belief that their children can do more than they think. So often, I see parents trying to find rationales and excuses for why children are not accomplishing things that I think they can accomplish, when ultimately I just know that the kid needs a kick in the pants and needs a hug and needs to be told that they can do more than they think they can do. And I think what's happening is, in an attempt to sort of protect children, we are not being honest with kids, And so for that reason, I think it's been challenging for both children and for parents in that regard. It's the thing that upsets me the most. It's the thing that makes me sad the most, is our unwillingness to have those honest, frank discussions with parents, with kids, and even with our own colleagues.
I hear you. It sounds like a parenting thing. As a parent of 3 kids, school-age kids, I would agree. I mean, when we talk about the parents, I look here and I'm like, yeah, we're the problem. I mean, we're putting this pressure on the schools to do it this way, and I don't know if this is really what we want, because if we have the honest conversation, what do we want? We're not trying to raise kids, we're trying to raise adults. So to do that, we gotta let go. And to hear that's where you started doesn't surprise me. That's where you're landing when you're talking to your parents of your 5th graders. Do you feel like, can you have these conversations? Are you having these conversations? And
I do. And I don't understand why it works for me. My wife, who's a kindergarten teacher, she tells me a bunch of things. She says, well, you've been teaching 25 years in the same school, in the same classroom for the last 21 years. So people know you and respect you. So when they walk into your classroom and you have the reputation you have, and I was Teacher of the Year and a finalist for the Connecticut Teacher, I have certain bankable assets that I can put to use for me. I can leverage. So for me, I have a great relationship with the parents in my school, and I'm always honest. I'm so honest that there are moments when I have teachers say, we're going to go to this PPT and we'd like you to tell the parents the truth, because we know you're willing to tell the parents the truth. And it's the truth, like when a parent says they're just going to catch up, and you have to tell a kid, listen, or you have to tell a parent, your child might not catch up because they have a legitimate learning disability that's going to prevent them from being at an intellectual level that their classmates are in. And it will probably always be a struggle for them. And they're not just going to catch up. We're going to have to put in some systems in play, all the things that we have to tell them. But so often we're afraid to tell parents this. Maybe it's because I've been doing it for 25 years. So even if a parent doesn't like me, what's going to happen? They're just not going to like me, and that's going to be the end of it. And my wife says I have that unique ability to not care what other people think of me, which is both profoundly powerful and devastating at times. She says it is absolutely a knife that cuts both ways. So for those reasons, I have that advantage. But I do think that one of the things that we fail teachers at, the thing I would love to go to colleges and teach, there's no college classes that teach you how to deal with parents, how to communicate with parents, how to communicate with kids, how to communicate with your principal and with your colleagues. There's none of that, and that is the most important thing. More important than delivering a lesson to kids, because you can figure that out eventually. But how do you talk to a parent who's angry? How do you talk to a parent who's sad? How do you talk to a parent who's worried? How do you communicate effectively with parents to get them to believe in what you're doing? Little things go a long way, sort of like classroom furniture. I used to work with this guy, this wonderful teacher, who during parent-teacher conferences, he would wear a suit. He never wore a suit any day of his life except in parent-teacher conferences. So first of all, parents know that. They see you all the time. So now you're dressing up for them. That's weird. And they think it's weird, and they know it's weird because it's weird. But also, the problem is it's creating this distance between the parent and the teacher when you dress up for them, right? Suddenly you're establishing a formal position, and for some reason you've decided that this parent-teacher conference is going to be formal, so formal I'm going to dress up as if I was going to a wedding, except I'm just coming to my classroom to sit at a little desk and talk to you about your kid. I actually aggressively underdress for parent-teacher conferences because I want them to walk into the room and go, oh, he's a guy I would see at the restaurant tonight, or he's a guy I would play golf with, So I wear t-shirts and jeans, and sneakers most of the time anyway, but I really underdress during parent-teacher conferences. And I tell them I want them to call me Matt, and I try to call them by their first name if they allow it. And they always do once I say I'm Matt. I want to create this bond where parents can just feel like I'm a guy who's spending time with your kid. And then, when it comes time to what you say to parents, I have 2 kids of my own, and I've been blinded by paperwork in parent-teacher conferences. I've never wanted to see a single piece of paper in my life in a parent-teacher conference, and I don't show a piece of paper. Parents want to hear that you love their kid, that you know their kid, and that you believe their kid could be doing more. And if you just say those things, I love your child, which I almost always do. I can count in 25 years 2 kids I could not love. Only 2, that's pretty good. So I love your kid genuinely. I know your kid, which means I'm going to say things about your kid that you know are true, that tell you that I know your kid. And then I'm going to tell you your kid's doing fine, but they could be doing better, because every parent on the planet thinks their kid could be doing better. And all they want is for their teacher to see that too and say, I'm going to push your kid because I know your kid could be doing more than they are right now, because every kid could. And if you just say those 3 things, every parent's going to love you.
How long did it take you to figure that out?
Like 10 years. And it happened when I had my own kids. It happened when I had my daughter, and I realized if they just love her, that's fine. That would be great. I don't even need them to teach her. She goes to school every day. I mean, ultimately what you want is a kid to enjoy coming to school every day. If the kid loves coming to school, the parent is never going to bother you. And that is absolutely true. There are parents who are monsters all the way till 5th grade. They come into my classroom, the kid enjoys school, and they're quiet for the year. Because you can't complain if your kid's coming home and saying, I want to go back to school tomorrow. So if you can just get to that, if you can just get kids to be excited about school, no one's ever going to bother you about what you're doing.
Man, so many things from that resonate with me, because you're right. It's not what you tell them, what you show them. You go into conferences. You have these tiny moments really throughout a school year where you're interacting with the parents. And if we're saying the parents are one of the main drivers that is like forcing us kind of in the wrong direction, it goes to me of like, all right, how do we train teachers to have this? Because it is a little bit chicken and egg. Yeah, the parents are going to be horrible to some degree, but when the teacher combats it with that type of messaging, it's probably going to end like the vast majority of kind of these complaints that really that the heartburn that the teachers have. Because I have so many friends that are teachers, and those are always the most devastating interactions, are the ones where they had like a horrible interaction with a parent. Not so much with a kid, it's with the parent. Those are the ones that keep them up at night. Those are the ones that make me like, how much longer do I really want to do this type of thing?
Yeah. Well, I understood at an early age in my career, that the parents were my clients and not the kids. That the kids are like the people I get to hang out with every day, but the customers are the parents. And so as long as I make the customers happy, I'm good to go. And so it doesn't take much. I often tell teachers that September, October, and November, be so overly communicative. Like, just go overboard and make sure that these parents get to know you in those first 3 months. Tell them stories, make phone calls, text messages. I've stopped sending emails to parents. I now send video messages. I record myself and send the video, and that's a lot better than them reading a message from me. So many of the parents tell me, I don't even watch your video, but while I'm like cooking dinner, I listen to you talk to me while I'm cooking dinner. Can you imagine? Like, this is the kind of thing I tell people in business all the time, is we're trying to create communication that is positive and continuing with our customers. So I have parents cooking a meal for their families and listening to me talk about the school day and how things went. There's no better way to create a positive feeling than to like be cooking a pot of pasta for your kid while your teacher is telling you what happened in school that day. You can't help but love me at that point. So it's small decisions that we make like that can do enormous good for us. And I often say I work so hard in September, October, and November to get parents to understand what's happening in the classroom, but believe in me, answer every question they've ever had. By April, they don't even want to hear from me anymore. They're fine. They're like, okay, he did it. Great. I believe in him. It's like buying an alarm system for your house. Like you play with it for the first 2 months and you're so happy it's there, but then you just forget about it because you know it's good to go, right? That's essentially what I am. I am guaranteeing them in the first 3 months that I am a great teacher and I'm going to take care of your kid and I love your kid. And then by April, they're like, yeah, we get it. We don't need to hear from you anymore. You've proven it to us. Just finish the year for God's sake.
So if you were going to talk to an audience of school superintendents and principals, like let's pretend like it's this podcast, what would you hope they walk away from this?
Well, the thing I probably said that was most important is that if kids enjoy coming to school every day, 99% of your problems go away, because it's hard for a parent to complain about anything if their kid loves school. And so the number one thing that I think every teacher and every superintendent and every principal should be prioritizing in school these days is fun. F-U-N. When we created our mission statement for our school about 20 years ago, we went on a retreat, and because I'm a writer, they sent me off into the room to craft the first mission statement, create a proposal based upon what we've said. And I had the word fun in it. I said, guarantee of places, da, 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 and fun. And they laughed when I had fun. They were like, oh, Matt. And I said, no, I'm serious. That's the most important word in the whole mission statement. Eventually it came out. They wouldn't let it be in there. They decided that having a fun school should not be part of the mission. And I think it should be the number one thing. Kids of all kinds, difficult children, academically superior kid, everyone, every kid ultimately will be better, the best version of themselves if they're having fun. And so if you create an environment where kids have fun, behavior problems disappear. Attention problems disappear. Kids learn more. Kids want to learn. And they go home and they tell their parents, I want to come back to school the next day. And people don't understand what fun is. So fun can be the teacher's telling stories in the front of the room. And they're funny stories about his childhood that he's weaving into his lessons in order to teach meaning, message, theme, and weirdly long division all at the same time. That's a great way to have fun. But another great way to have fun is if I'm teaching long division, I print out a page of 20 long division problems. And I tell the kids, do any 5 that you want. I don't care which 5. Because my plan was only for them to do 5 that day. But I have a choice as a teacher. I can give them a sheet of paper with 5 problems on it, or I can give them a sheet of paper with 20 problems on it, tell them to choose the 5 they want, and tell them to draw like mean faces over the other ones that they don't have to do, or cross them out with a red pen I'm going to give you. These are the ones I don't have to do. That's fun for kids. It takes so little. It takes a little bit of thought, a little bit of creativity, maybe looking around for ideas. But once kids can do things like that, fun can just be you get to choose your partner today. Or fun could be you get to choose your partner, but it has to be someone with a birthday within 3 months of your birthday, right? Weirdly, that is fun for anyone who is, let's say, 12 years old or less. That would be fun for them to do. These little things cause kids to suddenly see the day as a little different than the day before, a little more fun than the day before, a chance to do things that they've never done before. And if we just did that, if we prioritize that over every single other thing, all the other problems would disappear.
Matthew, really appreciate it. I know we're at our time here, but I'm going to let you have kind of your final word. Is there anything I didn't ask or anything that you would like to share that I should have been asking?
Oh, that's a tough question. Well, I guess... I guess when it comes to school, I preach the fun all the time. I just think it's so important. I guess the other thing I would say, and this is for superintendents, principals, teachers, all the way down, is the best way to connect with students is to be a human being with your students. When I was a kid, almost every one of my teachers was a black box. I didn't know if they were married. I didn't know if they had kids. It was that time when teachers didn't speak of themselves. They spoke only of the curriculum, right? And the teachers I remember the most, Lester Maroney, Pat Sullivan, all of them, Jackie LeBlanc, all of them were not the black boxes. They were the ones who were human beings to me, who I understood parts of their lives and were storytellers, were the ones who came in and somehow wove lessons from their life into the lessons they were teaching, and I got to know them as people. And I think it's a terrible mistake when teachers fail to do that for students. And I think it's a real terrible mistake when teachers fail to talk about the problems and the struggles and the ridiculousness of their lives with their kids. We should not be presenting to children some idealized platonic version of a human being. Instead, we should be walking into class and saying the most ridiculous thing we did. One of the dumbest and best things I've ever done in class. I went to the restroom and I discovered, for reasons I still don't understand, that I had 2 pairs of underwear on that day. Somehow I had put on a pair of underwear, and then I put on a second pair of underwear, and then I put my pants on. I came out of the bathroom. I walked into my class. I said, "You're never going to believe what I did today. I have 2 pairs of underwear on." Now, I don't know. That might have not been like the best thing to tell kids, because for the rest of the day, it's basically all I heard. But they wanted to come to school the next day. And when I share things like that with kids, I accidentally put 2 pairs of underwear on. It doesn't surprise me a week later when one of my female students comes to me and says, "I just had my first period." And my thought is, there's only 2 men in this entire building. There's 9,000 women and 2 men. Why is she telling me? It's because last week I told her I had 2 pairs of underwear on. I was vulnerable and honest, and I was willing to share a moment of possible embarrassment and even shame with the class. So in a moment of possible embarrassment and even shame, and a young lady who's experiencing her first period for the first time, she looks around and she says, "Who should I tell?" And she says, "I'm going to tell him because he tells me stuff. So I feel okay telling him stuff." So if you're a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, and you are a black box in any way to your kids, or if you're afraid to share the mistakes you're making on a daily basis with your students, you're doing a terrible disservice to them. You have to be a human being before you can be anything else.
Matthew, thank you very much for your time, for what you're doing, the service that you're doing as a teacher, and to help everyone. Take it from a perspective of how do we make life a little more entertaining. So I really appreciate it. All your contact information we'll put on the show notes for people who want to reach out to him. And I would highly recommend that we talk about all these conferences and all these things that we're doing. We need to get better at it. We're talking about learning environments for kids. We need better learning environments for adults as well. So thank you for that. And just a reminder to listeners, wherever you're listening, hit subscribe. BetterLearningPodcast.com is kind of the hub for everything. And Matthew, really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
The views and opinions expressed in the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and of my guest, and do not necessarily represent the organizations we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.